The Forest Patrol. The crisp morning air nipped at Riley's cheeks as she and Duke entered the whispering woods. Sunlight dripped through the canopy, painting the moss-covered forest floor in shifting patterns of light and shadow. Towering pines stood like silent sentinels, their needles releasing a fragrant, earthy scent with every gust of wind. Duke, a magnificent Belgian Malinois, trotted confidently beside her, his keen eyes scanning the undergrowth. "All right, boy, let's keep our eyes peeled," Riley murmured, her hand instinctively resting on the reassuring weight of her medic kit. She inhaled deeply, the familiar scent of pine and damp earth a comforting balm. It was moments like these, surrounded by the quiet majesty of the forest, that reminded her why she'd chosen this path. Being a K9 medic wasn't just a job, it was a calling, a way to combine her love for animals with her desire to serve. Every rescued creature, every life touched, was a victory against the darkness. Duke suddenly stiffened, his ears perked, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Riley immediately went on alert, her senses heightened. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, her hand moving to the tranquilizer gun strapped to her thigh. He strained forward, his nose twitching, and then he was off, weaving silently through the trees. "Duke! Heel!" Riley commanded, but he was already too far, his instincts overriding her command. Sighing, she followed, trusting his judgment. He wouldn't run unless he had a good reason. It was usually a squirrel, a rabbit, or some other small creature he'd flushed out, his reward being a quick sniff and a wag of his tail before returning to her side, proud as punch. The forest grew denser, the sunlight fading as they descended into a ravine. The air hung heavy with the smell of damp leaves and decaying wood. Duke was circling a thicket of thorny bushes, whining softly. Riley pushed through the branches, wincing as thorns snagged at her uniform. And then she saw it. Not a rabbit, not a squirrel, but something far more significant. Something that made her heart leap into her throat. A scattering of dark crimson droplets stained the fallen leaves. Fresh blood. And the bushes, they were matted and broken, as if something large and powerful had forced its way through. Riley's hand tightened on the tranquilizer gun. This wasn't a routine patrol anymore. Something was definitely wrong. "Duke," she said, her voice low and urgent, "find it." "Find what made this?" A cry in the thicket. Duke, usually a whirlwind of controlled energy, slammed to a halt. His ears perked, nose twitching, as he stared intently at a particularly dense thicket of thorn bushes and tangled vines. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that wasn't aggression, but intense focus. "What is it, boy?" Riley asked, her hand instinctively moving to the Glock at her hip. She scanned the surrounding forest, her eyes constantly moving, picking out details. A broken branch here, disturbed leaf litter there, signs of recent activity. Duke whined, pouring at the ground, his gaze never leaving the thicket. He looked back at Riley, a clear plea in his intelligent eyes. All right," as she said, unclipping his leash. "Find it, Duke. But easy now. We don't know what's in there." The Malinois shot forward, disappearing into the green wall with surprising grace. Riley followed cautiously, pushing aside branches, the thorns snagging at her uniform. "Hello," she called out, her voice firm but not threatening. "Is anyone there? State your name." Silence. Only the rustling of leaves and the chirping of unseen insects answered her. Then, a sound, a low, pained whimper, reached her ears. It wasn't human. Riley pushed through the last of the thicket and stopped, her breath catching in her throat. Trapped beneath a fallen tree, its massive trunk pinning its hind legs, was a leopard. Its golden fur was matted with blood, and its breathing came in ragged gasps. One of its eyes, the color of amber, stared up at her, filled with pain and fear. "Damn," Riley whispered. Duke nudged her hand, whimpering softly. She knelt, her hand hovering over the animal, unsure. "Easy there," she murmured, her voice soothing. "We're here to help." The medic's decision. Riley knelt beside the leopard, the metallic tang of blood heavy in the air. The animal hadn't moved since they'd arrived, its breathing shallow and ragged. She ran a gloved hand carefully down its matted fur, feeling for the source of the injury. It was the left hind leg, just above the paw. A clean break, she suspected, judging by the unnatural angle. "Damn," she muttered, more to herself than to Duke, who was now fixated on a thicket of thorny bushes a few yards away, a low growl rumbling in his chest. He wasn't focused on the leopard. Something else was hidden within those tangled branches. "Easy, boy," she said, barely glancing up. She needed to concentrate. The leopard's eyes flickered open, meeting hers. They were the color of amber, clouded with pain but still holding a spark of wildness. "He's in bad shape," she said to Duke, even though she knew he wouldn't understand the words. "Compound fracture, most likely. Needs immediate attention." Duke whined, shifting his weight, still unwilling to break his gaze from the thicket. Whatever was in there had him spooked. Riley sighed. She knew what she had to do. "We're going to help him, Duke," she said firmly, her voice leaving no room for argument. "I swore an oath." Duke stopped growling, turning his head towards her, ears perked. He seemed to sense the shift in her resolve. The leopard, as if understanding, let out a weak whimper. The risk was immense. A wounded leopard was still a leopard, capable of inflicting serious damage. But Riley couldn't just leave him to die. Not when she had the skills to help. She reached into her medical pack, pulling out a sedative. "Okay, big guy," as she said softly, her eyes locked on the leopard's. "This is going to sting a little. An unlikely rescue." The tree pinned Leo's hind leg. Riley assessed the situation, calculating angles and pressure points. "Duke, stay," she commanded, though her focus was already on the winch cable in her pack. The leopard snarled, a low, guttural sound that vibrated through the ground. Duke whined, his attention still glued to the thorny thicket, but he obeyed, settling on his haunches. Carefully, Riley secured the cable to a nearby boulder, its weathered surface providing solid purchase. She ran the other end under the fallen tree, positioning it to lift the weight directly above Leo's trapped limb. "Easy, boy," as she murmured to Duke, though the words were as much for Leo's benefit as for her dog's. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she cranked the winch, the mechanism groaning under the strain. The tree shifted, lifting just enough for Riley to pull Leo's leg free. He flinched but didn't struggle, his amber eyes fixed on her face. The exposed skin was torn, the fur matted with blood. It looked deep. Riley reached for her field kit, ignoring Duke's renewed whimpering. He was fixated again on the thicket. "Something's got you spooked, here, buddy," as she said, more to reassure herself than him. She cleaned the wound with antiseptic, the leopard hissing softly. He tensed, but didn't pull away. She applied antibiotic ointment and wrapped the gash with sterile bandages. "There, all done." Duke tentatively approached Leo, sniffing the air cautiously. Leo remained still, watching the dog with wary interest. Slowly, Duke nudged Leo's head with his nose, a gesture that seemed to surprise them both. A low rumble vibrated in Leo's chest, not a growl, but something softer. Duke wagged his tail, just once, then settled down next to Riley, finally taking his eyes off the thicket. A leopard's hunger. Each dawn, before the sun fully clawed its way over the horizon, Riley trekked to the edge of the perimeter. A dented mess kit held scraps of cooked meat pilfered from the mess hall. A canteen, heavy with water, swung from her other hand. Duke, initially fixated on sniffing the thicket, now waited patiently at her heel, understanding blooming in his intelligent eyes. She placed the food and water just inside the tree line, a silent offering. "You're gonna get yourself killed, Riley," as Sergeant Miller grumbled one afternoon, catching her returning from her ritual. "That's a wild animal, not a stray kitten." "His hurt, Miller," O'Reilly countered, her voice firm. "And his hungry. We wouldn't leave a wounded soldier out there to starve." "A leopard's not a soldier," a Miller retorted, his face reddening. "It's a predator. It'll see your kindness as weakness." Riley sighed, frustration prickling her skin. "Maybe. Or maybe it'll see it as kindness. Either way, I can't just stand by and do nothing." The whispers followed her. Doubts, thinly veiled as concern, echoed in the barracks. Even those who respected her leadership questioned her judgment. One evening, after a particularly tense day of training, Corporal Jones approached her. "Sergeant, with all due respect, are you sure about this? That leopard, it could turn on you, on us, at any time. Duke, too. He's a valuable asset." Riley looked at Jones, her gaze unwavering. "I know the risks, Corporal. But I believe in helping those in need, whether they wear uniforms or spots. And I trust Duke. His gut instincts I can only dream of." She paused, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her face. "Maybe I'm a fool. But I have to try." The scent of danger. The air hung thick and heavy, pregnant with the coming storm. Deeper in the forest, beyond the familiar rustle of leaves and chirping of insects, a different sound cut through the tranquility, the metallic snick of a snare being set. "Think this'll hold a deer?" A gruff voice rasped. "Deer, boar, anything stupid enough to wander through," a second voice replied, laced with a cruel amusement. "Just keep setting Jed. The faster we fill the truck, the faster we get paid." Duke whined, a low rumble in his chest that vibrated against Riley's leg. They were nearing the tree line, the usual symphony of the forest replaced by an unsettling stillness. The dog's ears were rigid, swiveling, his nostrils flared as he tested the wind. Riley knelt, her hand running down Duke's back, feeling the tension coiled beneath his fur. "What is it, boy?" she murmured, scanning the dense foliage. Duke tugged at his leash, a frantic energy thrumming through him. He strained towards a patch of thick undergrowth, his growl deepening. The scent hit Riley then, a faint but unmistakable tang of motor oil and something else, something acrid and unfamiliar. It wasn't the scent of the forest, of decaying leaves and damp earth. It was sharp, metallic, and undeniably wrong. A knot tightened in Riley's stomach. She trusted Duke's instincts implicitly. He'd never steered her wrong. "Easy, Duke," as she said, her voice low. "Let's see what we've got." She unclipped his leash, letting him lead the way, her hand instinctively reaching for the reassuring weight of her sidearm. The air crackled with a silent warning, a palpable sense of danger that prickled her skin. This wasn't just a routine patrol. Something was definitely out of place. Something wicked this way comes. Trapped again. The snapped branches and churned earth told a story of hurried passage. One Riley and Duke followed with grim determination. The air hung heavy with the metallic tang of blood, a scent that made Duke whine, a low, guttural sound of distress vibrating in his chest. Riley stroked his head, offering silent reassurance, though her own heart hammered with a dread she couldn't shake. Then they heard it, a choked, rasping growl that ended in a pained whimper. Riley pushed through a thicket of thorny bushes, and the scene that unfolded made her breath hitch. Leo! He was suspended a foot off the ground, a thick wire biting deep into his hind leg. The metal teeth of the snare glinted cruelly in the dappled sunlight. His eyes, usually so vibrant, were clouded with pain and fear. Damn them, O'Reilly hissed, her voice tight with fury. Two figures emerged from the shadows, their faces hard and unapologetic. One carried a rifle, the other a coil of wire. Poachers. Well, the one with the rifle drawled, his voice laced with a sneer. Looks like we caught ourselves a big one. Riley stepped forward, Duke growling softly at her side, his hackles raised. Release him, as she commanded, her voice dangerously low. Now. The poacher chuckled, a harsh, grating sound. Or what, soldier? You and your muck gunner stop us? He raised the rifle slightly, a clear threat. Riley's hand instinctively went to the pistol at her hip. He's injured. He needs help. Let him go, and walk away. That's your only chance. Her eyes flickered between the two men, assessing their stance, their weapons, their intentions. This wasn't just about duty, it was about saving a life she had sworn to protect. The air crackled with unspoken tension, a silent battle of wills fought under the watchful gaze of the ancient forest. An unlikely alliance. The poachers encroached, greed sharpening their features. Riley braced herself, drawing her weapon. Turn back. Now. Duke resonated with a guttural warning, a rumble promising pain. What's the cur gunner do about it? The leader spat, hoisting his rifle. Think a little lady like you can stop us? Leopard pelts fetch a fine price. A savage bellow tore through the charged air before Riley could answer, deeper than Duke's, shaking her very core. The poachers faltered, their arrogance dissolving like mist. From the deep shadows, Leo materialized. He was battered, limping, his fur clotted with crimson, but his eyes burned with incandescent wrath. He moved with unexpected swiftness, a tawny missile aimed at the nearest man, claws extended. The poacher shrieked, abandoning his weapon and scrambling away. But Leo was relentless. A furious whirlwind, he carved a path through their ranks, scattering them like chaff in a storm. Each earth-shattering roar was a raw declaration of ownership. Sensing the power shift, Duke dove into the fray, nipping at ankles, adding his ferocious voice to the chaotic din. The poachers, gripped by terror and hopelessly outmatched, offered little resistance. They bolted, stumbling over the uneven ground in their desperate flight, discarding their gear and a heap of wicked traps. Silence reclaimed the forest, punctuated only by Duke's heavy breaths and the whispering leaves. Riley lowered her firearm, her pulse still racing. She gazed at Leo, his flank rising and falling rapidly, his stare unwavering. He had stood as their shield. He had kept them safe. An improbable bond, hammered into existence by mutual peril. A sanctuary for Leo. The acrid smell of antiseptic stung Riley's nostrils as she cleaned the fresh gash on Leo's flank. Duke, usually a whirlwind of chaotic energy, lay quietly by her side, his head resting on his paws, a low whine rumbling in his chest. He seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, the fragile thread on which Leo's life hung. Riley felt it too, a connection that transcended their different species, a bond forged in shared danger and mutual respect. She realized then she couldn't just leave him to recover here, in a makeshift enclosure, vulnerable and alone. He needed a place where he could truly heal, a sanctuary. She contacted a wildlife organization she knew, explaining Leo's situation. The response was immediate. A specialized transport team would be dispatched the following day. Riley spent the rest of the evening by Leo's side, stroking his fur, murmuring reassurances. He purred softly, a sound that vibrated through her hand, a fragile melody of hope. The next morning, the transport team arrived, efficient and professional. They carefully sedated Leo and loaded him into a custom-built crate. Riley followed in the jeep, Duke bouncing excitedly in the back until a stern Duke, "Settle," silenced him. The sanctuary was a sprawling expanse of protected land, a haven of lush vegetation and free-flowing streams. As they released Leo into a spacious enclosure, mimicking his natural habitat, Riley felt a pang of sadness, but also a surge of relief. He was safe. In the weeks that followed, Riley and Duke visited Leo often. They'd sit outside his enclosure, Riley reading aloud from dog-eared paperbacks, Duke content to simply watch Leo pace, slowly regaining his strength. Leo, in turn, would approach the fence, rubbing against the wire mesh, his eyes fixed on them with an unmistakable affection. Their unusual friendship became a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of compassion. Soldiers from the base, initially skeptical, began to accompany Riley on her visits, drawn to the unlikely trio. Donations poured in, not just for Leo, but for the sanctuary as a whole, a wave of support fueled by a soldier, her dog, and a leopard who had found a home.